What is up, you guys? Welcome to the first episode of the 9-part miniseries, Gaylag Archipelago, produced and hosted by Sam, everyone's top 2 favorite twink of Twink Revolution. So I actually thought of this idea because of a friend pointing out some fun gay history in Eastern Germany when it was socialist. And I was like, well, wouldn't it be fun to look at some other socialist regions or countries and look at their super gay history? Because I just feel like there's not enough gay representation in socialism, you know? I'm queering socialism, you guys, which sounds horrible, and I'm so sorry I just said that. But yeah, we're going to cover 9 countries, and we're going to start with everyone's favorite, especially the tankies. I'm just kidding, you're all loved here. It's in order of history of when they started. So we're doing Soviet Union. Because fuck the French commune. That was crap. So we're just going to skip that. Yeah, but to give you the full picture, we're going to start you off before the Bolshevik Revolution. So basically, before, the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia sucked. Like, there was rich people, and there was a lot of poor people, and they were basically slaves, but we called them serfs for some reason, because they're white, kinda. Unless you didn't buy into the racial categories yet. Or were they around? I don't know. But a lot of Western visitors, so like European people, would visit Russia and would actually comment on how open the homosexuality was among all classes, which, sounds super progressive. But it's okay. The state didn't care. Just the religious authorities would come after all the gays and the cross-dressers. Also, if it isn't clear, they're probably not gay because that wasn't a thing yet. But I'm just going to refer to gays as like anyone who liked putting their dick in ass or having a dick in their ass, and both for men. So don't hold it against me, guys. I know. But that went on for a while until 1716, when Peter the Great, one of the czars, was like, you know what? Let's ban male homosexuality in the military. And they were going to do the whole country for everyone, but they weren't having any of it. And it was basically his goal was to modernize and Europeanize, which shows yet again white people suck. Just kidding, kind of. But yeah, they were cracking down on the gays and all the butt sex in the military, which I assumed never meant anything if you know the U.S. military. Then it went on, and in 1835, Tsar Nicholas I finally achieved what Peter the Great never could, and he passed Article 995, which outlawed sodomy. And if you didn't know, sodomy includes ass sex and oral sex. But the courts were like, yeah, we're just going to prosecute anal sex. You can still blow your men if you want. So that's pretty cool. Their courts are kind of progressive if you believe in all that shit. But yet again, lesbians, basically for the whole episode, you're basically ignored. No one cares about lesbians in Russia, which is good or bad, depending on if you wanted to be oppressed. I mean, you still were, but not in the same way. And then they sent all the gays or butt lovers to Siberia for 4 to 5 years as punishment, which is pretty cool, That doesn't happen ever again in Russia. But yeah, despite all that, time went on, and you would think, oh no, there's no more gayness, and that's not true. The bourgeois decadence of the Russian Empire still allowed people of the homosexual persuasion to persist, and artists and intellectuals would basically get to have all their butt sex, and, gay behaviors tolerated by the government as long as they had close connections. So it was primarily a bourgeois decadence option, except if you were the Eastern Orthodox Church, it was still bad and an act of corruption and decadence, which, I mean, it's kind of true. So who is right in history? I don't know. And it was primarily in urbanized Moscow and St. Petersburg, which sounded pretty lit actually at the time. There was gay brothels and prostitutes. Super woke, sex work is work, guys. Sex work is work. And they even had like kind of gay mayor in Moscow, Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, was quite well known for his male-on-male loving, which I mean, it's the representation we all deserved. Rich people having sex while everyone else goes to the gulags. Or they weren't gulags, they were just prisons. Same difference. And yeah, they also had a secret language, which I mean, every gay culture seems to have that. And it didn't seem like it was very secret. One of the ways was caking on makeup and mascara. That sounds pretty gay to me, but I don't know. I wasn't in Russia. And they also did red ties or shawls, which meant they all wanted to be fisted. I'm just kidding. It just meant they were gays. But as that went on, the decadence and the bourgeois values of the Tsarist Russian Empire continued. And all these poor people were like, fuck this shit. We're over this. And despite like people like Lenin being like, oh, I don't think we're ready yet, shit starts happening. The Bolshevik Revolution starts. A lot of fucking rich people die. A lot of poor people die. And the Bolsheviks win. And that's pretty cool. So after the 1917 revolution, you would think, oh, were the gays still oppressed? Well, not actually. They were so fed up with like the czars who sucked. They were like, let's abolish all of their criminal laws. And that happened to include the laws that prosecuted, the sodomy and such. So they decriminalized sodomy, and that's pretty cool. As long as you like sex. If you're asexual, you're also ignored in the story. But yeah, people like to say that the revocation of the homosexual law was because they were so woke, you guys, but that's just liberal bullshit. Turns out it just happened to be in the Tsarist law and they didn't support it. Though, fun fact, they passed a bunch of future criminal laws and still never prosecuted the gays yet. So, who knows? Maybe they were a little woke. Maybe Lenin was like super like anti-trad. Probably not. I don't know. But at the same time, they also liberalized a bunch of other sexual acts, and in 1918, all the bitches got divorced. Like, literally, it was just like a spike of divorce. It sounded amazing or horrible, depends on how trad you are. And basically all the old religious restrictions were gone, and everyone was like, fuck the church, fuck rich people. It was pretty cool. And basically sexual liberation was utilized as a tool to fight the old orthodoxy. So unlike in the US, when we have our sexual revolution like 90 years later or whatever, I don't know, 80 years later, to be like, fuck you, dad, I'm going to have sex with all these men. Then it was like, fuck the church, fuck rich people. Which, I mean, it's pretty cool. No one talks about the sexual revolution in the Soviet Union. And also the whole country had state atheism as a policy. So religious institutions that were basically super hardcore anti like sex and butt sex and gay sex were like heavily restricted, and their goal was to, crush them like ants in a child of like in the hand of a child. So they wanted to eliminate that shit. Did that work out? I don't know. Look at Russia now. But as time went on, the sexual revolution kind of did a lot of cool things. As one modern day Slavic studies and modern day historian who expertise is on homosexuality in Russia, Dan Healy says in his book, Homosexual Desire in Revolutionary Russia, he brings up a lot of fun facts about the Soviet Union, showing that they basically like in some cases were chill with like same-sex marriage in like a kind of weird way, which I'll explain later. How the USSR early on became a world leader in gender corrective surgery, along with Weimar Germany. And then also Soviet medical experts got really into like sex research and stuff and worked with transgender people to kind of explore the concept of gender and all that biology and shit like that. But going back to the gay marriage thing, there's this person named, I'm going to butcher this, Avensky Fedorovich. That's not the real name. It's like alibi name, was originally assigned female in pre-Soviet Union, and later wanted to become, or later switched over to dressing like a man, identifying as a man, and they married a woman nicknamed S, who had no idea. Is it problematic? I have no idea. And they formed a family, including S's bastard child from one of the people she cheated on Avengi with. And I guess if you, in today's terms, it probably isn't politically correct, but in our terms, both were legally still the same gender. So technically it was a same-sex marriage, but to us it wouldn't be. So don't come for me, PC warriors. I'm not saying that shit. But the Commissariat of Justice basically was like, oh, this is fine. You guys can get married. This is consensual. We don't care. So there was a same-sex marriage, kinda-ish, which is pretty cool. I mean, it ends horribly. They get split up because of a job, and then Avengi becomes an alcoholic and dies alone. But it's still pretty cool. I mean, there wasn't a lot going on, but most people were still poor. I'm sorry to tell you. But that wasn't the only sexual revolution that was going on of like same-sex marriage and research. There was some chick named Alexandra Kalante, who was actually an early Bolshevik revolutionary, and her whole thing was the new family order and the new woman, which were basically like, fuck marriage and fuck housework and fuck childcare, and society and the state should take all these roles on, which it kind of did. I mean, in many ways, like cooperative kitchens were created, daycares were created all over the country. Marriage got replaced with like kind of like a less religious option, so like civil marriage. And yeah, sex wasn't viewed as so negative to her and to a lot of people, primarily the rich people or former rich people in the cities, but you'll get what you can take. But as the revolution went on, it was limited to cities, and it was kind of like, oh, it's your responsibility as like an individual. Like the state's not going to force you to be sexually liberated, because they didn't care. They were trying to improve the living standards of everyone. So basically, if you're poor in this scenario, you're not really part of the discussion. I'm sorry. So lesbians, you're out. Asexuals, you're out. Poor people, you're out. I'm sorry. This is not your story. And all of the sexual revolution actually happened during the Civil War and World War I. So while like people were bombing each other, people were like, getting their freak on and divorcing their husbands or divorcing their wives. And it was pretty rad. So as time went on, social division still existed among the gays, like it is now. And there was two categories of the gays. There was the aristocrats, who were like the petty bourgeois of the former times. People were like the higher ranks of society still. And then there was the simples, which were probably named by the aristocrats. They didn't really cross over at all. Only occasionally would an aristocrat be like, damn, this simple here is fine as fuck. I'm going to take you to one of our parties. But that's pretty much it. There was no crossover. Not very egalitarian at the time, but if you were part of the travesti theater, which is, think of like early drag, but instead of like dancing to Rihanna, they were like reenacting like famous ballerinas and shit. That was like the thing. And those people could go between both classes and there was no stigma to it. So it's kind of cool. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to see a drag ballerina, but you get what you can get. Yeah, and in 1918, the Soviets completely abolished church weddings. Divorce was fully liberalized. So basically, if you didn't want to be married anymore, you could be like, peace, motherfucker. I'm out. And abortion was legalized. Pretty cool. Unless you're pro-life, then it wasn't cool, but I don't care. but still at the time, lots of stigma. Lots of people were still fired. There was no like Soviet protections of gay people. It wasn't like anti-discrimination laws or anything like that. So sorry to burst your bubble. I'm not going to romanticize it. But in 1918, proud, open homosexual Georgy Chicherin was appointed as the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs for the Russian Soviet Republic, which is pretty cool. And then in 1923, he was appointed as that same position, but for the whole USSR, which is actually pretty impressive because the only country or like Soviet republics that allowed gay marriage was Russia and Ukraine. If you were like Azerbaijan or like Turkmenistan or stuff. Sorry, this isn't all. You're also forgotten in this story. It's primarily Russia. My bad. I mean, even Lenin praised him. Lenin believed he was one of the possible reasons for brokering peace with Germany, which allowed for the revolution to survive despite, the wars and the lack of socialist revolutions in Western Europe like the Soviet Union was kind of holding out for. So that's cool. He has a happy ending. He doesn't. But we'll get to that later. And then you have your fun anarchists who really push nudism in the cities, of course. And basically they created a nude beach right next to the Cathedral of Christ, the Savior. And they created a group called Down with Shame with an exclamation point. And basically they would just like march through the streets naked and not act shameful. I don't know. It sounds kind of stupid and like bougie crap to me. But I mean, whatever floats your boat. And they actually had once 10,000 people march. After like, a few years ago, women had to wear skirts below their knees and stuff like that and had no rights. So that's pretty cool. But sadly, the sexual revolution wasn't intended to last. As more regions were liberated by the Red Army, a lot of those regions ended up amnestying criminals, whether political like prisoners or like actual criminals. So a lot of them were set free. And in the 1920s, there was an epidemic of rape, with many working class men viewing it as a way of class revenge to rape former noblewomen. So yet again, leftist men being complete shit. Nothing really changed in this story, I'm sorry. It's basically like modern day, but like there's no TV and there's no Netflix, but I think it ends happy, kind of. It doesn't. Also, 20% of the males end up getting STIs, which surprisingly was lower still than under Tsarist Russia. I don't know how they fully figured that all out, but still pretty cool. Maybe the universal health care had something to do with that eventually. I don't know when that was created. That wasn't relevant to my research, but maybe. And also, over half the children in Moscow were born out of wedlock. And you're like, oh, that's fine. But also, a lot of them were abandoned because people were more interested in individualist sexual lust than like taking care of children who could just be taken by the state and taken care of. So that wasn't good. There was a lot of orphans. I mean, who wants children? There was no birth control yet, I don't think. I don't know. I'm making some of this shit up. Possibly. There was anal sex. That's legal now. Yeah. But also a lot of this like rape and STIs and like orphans didn't suit very well for some of them in the party who still held on to reactionary attitudes. And I mean, in some ways, that reactionaryism is based in some problematic thing. I mean, STIs and orphans and like rape are all bad things. So yeah, there creates some reactionary elements. But it's okay. Throughout the 1920s, the party, the Communist Party was like, oh, we're split. So sometimes they'd be like, yeah, we should give gays more rights and reform should be passed. While others were like, these people are fucked in the head and are diseased. And I'll tell you who wins in the end, but you have to wait a little bit. But in the 1920s, there was also a lot of research. The Soviet government and the scientific community took great interest in research on human sexuality and the topics of homosexual and emancipation. Something you don't often hear because, people like to be like, socialist countries hated the gays forever because, it was so well in Europe at the time. Look it up. It wasn't very good. It was probably much better to be in the Soviet Union at the time. And people like Afanasy Shower. I'm sorry, my Russian is not good, guys. I'm trying my best. In January 1921, who was a Russian fleet soldier, decided to have an extremely elaborate gay wedding in Petrograd, which is like modern day St. Petersburg. And they invited 95 former army officers, soldiers, and even a woman who dressed in man's clothing. And the wedding was like, oh, it won't be fully accepted unless it's like Russian as hell. So there was the bread and salt, the parents' blessings happened, and it ended with like a boss-ass concert. So like an orchestra or something. There was no EDM yet, guys. I'm sorry. It was actually a Twink Rev Sum anthem. That was what the song was. And turns out this whole thing was a plot. So after the party happens, Afanasy and the secret police arrest everyone for being, quotations, counter-revolutionary. And they're all about the court. And they're like, yeah, this is stupid. So they closed the case. No one was punished. But everyone got to go to a boss-ass gay wedding in St. Petersburg. That's pretty cool, guys. Look at the bright side. But going back to some of the more research, in 1923, the Commissar of Health, Nikolai Semashko, sent delegates from the Commissariat of Health, and they went to the German Institute for Sexual Research, which did a lot of like early on trans surgery and stuff like that, and a lot of research in sexuality, and had discussions about like, oh, we should give full protections to gays, and they're just like everybody else. It's not a brain disease or anything like that. In the 1920s, guys, that's pretty cool. America didn't stop locking up gay people until like 2003. So that's a lot. Turns out when you give working people power, a lot more voices who don't want to put people in jail are elevated. That's cool. And another person, Dr. Gregory Botkus, in 1925, who was the director of Institute for Social Hygiene in Moscow, after going to some of these things, published The Sexual Revolution in Russia, which was published in Germany and the Soviet Union. And it basically declared homosexuality natural and that should be fully legally and socially respected. Pretty cool, I think. But then you also have people like Nikolai Semashko, I mentioned earlier, who was critical of like the anarchist nudist marches for being not very helpful while they're trying to like get rid of capitalist acts of prostitution and hooliganism, which I don't really know what they meant by hooliganism at the time. I didn't feel like looking into it. But he basically said nudity was breeding immorality and that they should fully prosecute them with the state. So shows there's back and forths. Chill with the gays, bad on naked people. So he was clearly wrong. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, as this went on, the reactionary element kind of took more power. There were some issues as like bureaucracy built up and some of the more conservative elements got power. And then sadly, Lenin died, the one who was kind of leading for a while. And Stalin takes power. And let's just say he's not the biggest fan of the fags. So basically, the devastation of World War I and the Russian Civil War basically goes on. The failures of the revolution in Western Europe goes on. And it's not looking too good for gays. For Soviet Union, they still go on for quite a while. But like a lot of this like kind of war and like distress of bureaucracy, conspiracy theories get started by one of the secret police chiefs, Genrikh Yagoda, who wrote to Stalin, homosexual spies were establishing a network of salons, nests, groups, and other pederast organizations, turning them into spy cells. Sadly, there was not fact checker, so Stalin bought into this, and yeah, it doesn't get better from here, guys. For many of the gays who fought so hard for the Soviet Union, life ended quite poorly, as conservative elements ran control. Chicherin, who was that guy who possibly saved the Soviet Union and was a commissar of foreign affairs, he went off to Germany to be treated, or was he sent off to Germany to be treated of his homosexuality. There was also Mikhail Kuzmin, one of Russia's most famous poets, who did his last reading in 1928 after kind of seeing where things were going, was heavily praised, and both died before shit got real bad. But for people like Nikolai Klyov, who was a Bolshevik revolutionary, he got shot in Siberia for being counter-revolutionary, in quotations. But that's okay. In July 1933, the case of the Leningrad homosexuals occurred, where they arrested 175 men. Much of the case is still classified, which kind of sucks, but we know most of them were imprisoned on charges of, quotations, working with British intelligence or being counter-revolutionary or even just morally corrupting the Red Army. And this is one of the key reasons they believe. And the Article 21 was passed by Stalin and the Communist Party, and they recriminalized male homosexuality with a punishment of 5 years in labor camps in Siberia. Where have we heard of that before? Yeah, so that wasn't good. Plus, people were still getting reported to employers if they couldn't arrest them for that. Turns out you had to catch them in the act of, pounding dick and ass. And that doesn't happen very often. So they would just tell their employers that they were engaging in gay hotspots. And then Stalin started shifting away from this sexual revolution to a kind of family values of women being revolutionaries while also working in the kitchen and taking care of the children. So sexual revolution died, guys. But it still had some revolutionary elements. I mean, women started getting educated and shit like that. So it wasn't completely bad, but it was still bad. And then, sorry, fascism starts to rise in Europe, and Stalin starts utilizing the fascism fear for state propaganda to accuse gay men of being part of fascism. And then once Hitler starts, murdering them in camps and stuff, they don't really change their mind. So that kind of sucks. But and in 1941, as fascism's kind of sweeping across Europe, Stalin's worried about lack of morale or lack of support in the country, and gives a bunch more power back to the Russian Orthodox Church, and basically allows churches to reopen, the allowance of religious publications to grow, and we all know how they were towards gays, so you can see where this is going. Yeah. And then it's kind of unclear how many were imprisoned. Estimates are around 25,000 people from 1934 to 1993. But most weren't sent for being, ass munchers. Just kidding. Most were sent for things like being counter-revolutionary or other acts like that, corrupting the military, stupid shit like that. And then that wasn't the only problem because of the growing anti-gayness in the country. be a growing power of the church and the propaganda of homosexuality being tied to fascism. There was the Romanetki, or the repairmen, and they basically tricked gay men to meet up for like hookups and then would beat the shit out of them or like blackmail them, which never happens again, you guys. um, but then Stalin loses power, he dies. And in 1950s and 60s, Nikita Khrushchev takes power, and he liberalizes marriage and abortion and a bunch of the things that Stalin kind of cracked down upon. But homosexuals were ignored. They were still criminalized. Sorry, gays. And they were still taught in Soviet sex ed, but not in the way you think. They were basically taught how it was tied to child molestation and STIs and stuff. So basically, the only thing they learned about homosexuality was when it was bad. Otherwise, it wasn't discussed in the country. Fun. And in 1959, a committee of Soviet jurists proposed to decriminalize homosexuality. But sadly, that failed because some of their other jurists were like, no, they disagreed. And that occurred under Brezhnev. Did I say that right? I don't know. And that was kind of due to the relaxing nature under Khrushchev, which was still bad, but like much more relaxed than Stalin. And it allowed gays to be kind of noticed more in public. And Soviet legal scholars started to read open discussions of, oh, maybe it's not a social ill, maybe they're not different than others, but they don't really get much more traction than that. And in the 70s and 80s, gay rights organizations start up, kind of like it did in most of the West. Though they were still prosecuted, arrested, beaten up by the KGB, which is like the state police, like security apparatus. And polls showed gays at the time were the most hated group in Russia in the 80s. Pretty cool, guys. We did it. Number one. But yeah, then the Soviet Union starts collapsing for a lot of reasons. Foreign intervention, mismanagement of power, shit like that. And in 1993, under Yeltsin, who fucking sucks, look him up. He was complete shithead, destroys the economy, and makes Russia suck. He abolished basically the anti-gay laws, Article 121. And before everyone was like, oh, see, capitalism freed the gays, it was because the European Council of Nations required him to do it to join, because he was basically a bootlicker of Western imperial powers and like neoliberal capitalism. That's pretty sexy. Yeah, things don't really get better. Things still fucking suck for gays. And in 1999, Putin takes power. You know, that hot man who rides horses and plays with like tigers and shit. And I think bears, I don't know. And at the same time, which has no relation to Putin, homosexuality is removed from the list of mental diseases. So that's pretty cool. It was a few years after a lot of Western countries, but still not that far behind. And in 2005, Nikolai Alexeyev, I don't know, I'm bad at Russian, guys, I'm sorry, formed the Moscow Pride Initiative, and the march was banned by Moscow's mayor, Yuri Lushkow, and the courts were also like, yeah, no, this isn't happening. Despite the ban, they marched, and there was obviously counter-protesters, and they laid flowers on a tomb of the unknown soldier. And actually, when interviewed about why they did it, it was because they were paying respects to the Red Army, who fought Nazism, which they considered the greatest threat to gays. So that's pretty cool. Turns out gays in the neoliberal period can still be not completely shitty. That's fun, guys. And then in 2013, Putin passes the gay propaganda law, which basically restricts propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships to minors. So poly people, I assume you're not too. And lesbians, you're brought back into the conversation. Congratulations. So that's not good. I mean, being gay is still legal, and I've actually had a person tell me I would die if I went to Russia. But despite all that, Russia's cities in Moscow and St. Petersburg actually continue to have quite a gay nightlife. They have clubs and bathhouses and cruising parties, like San Francisco, but probably like cooler because it's still kind of like taboo in a sense. While here, just like, oh my God, I'm paying $100 to like do Molly in a club, which sounds fun the first few times, but it gets boring after a while, guys. Also, a bunch of LGBT organizations emerged, like the Russian LGBT network, which is pretty cool. I mean, things are getting better, despite what media likes to say, or Eurovision questionnaires. In a 2019 survey of Russian youth, there showed an increasing support or toleration of the LGBT community, with around 13% saying they trust the community, 68% saying they don't really care, and then 17% having negative views, which is still not a lot, but it's like much more than prior years. And I even have this past year, or this current year, 2020, their first trans woman on the cover of Tatler magazine, which is one of the first few times it happened anywhere in the world. So, I mean, basically the conclusion is don't let conservatives rule it. Sexual liberation can cause reactionary elements like Reagan. I'm just kidding. And yeah, turns out gays have always been super gay. And also, sadly, as I'll go on in a future series, Stalin's legacy of anti-gayness permeates to all the socialist parties of the world. So until the next episode, I guess we'll see what happens. And yeah, hopefully you all enjoy the first episode.